Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon. So as you're all aware, we're here to provide an overview of the export control reform changes that went into effect earlier this year. And as we all know, specifically as that pertains to the export of silencers. We expect about 45 minutes to an hour in this session. Jordan, can you navigate me to the next slide, please? At the outset, we just want to provide a disclaimer. The presentation here is obviously a general summary of applicable statutes, regs, and opinions for everyone's informational purposes. It is not and shouldn't be construed as legal advice, and any individuals or businesses with specific needs for their situation should retain the services of competent counsel. And Orchid Advisors is not a law firm. Next, Jordan, please. All right, excellent. So a little bit of protocol before we get into the meat and potatoes of everything. We obviously have a large number of attendees on this WebEx. Thank you again for joining. And given the amount of people, we're going to keep everybody muted. If you have any issues with audio or visual, please feel free to email Sean at the email address that you see on the screen, or alternatively in the Zoom chat itself. If you're having video issues right now and you cannot see Sean's email address, it is S as in Sierra, P as in Papa, HELAN as in November @joinorchid.com. We will have a Q&A at the end of the session. Please enter all of your questions in the chat window in Zoom. You can direct those all to Jordan Young or in the general chat. But probably preferable to directly message Jordan in the chat window. And finally, the event today is being recorded and it will be made available later on our website should you like to download it at a later point in time. All right, so a little bit of an agenda. Following the introduction, we're going to turn it over to ASA and they're going to introduce themselves, part of the introduction. And then following that, the DDTC will be reviewing their export policy, their general policy, historical, and the changes that have been made recently. Following that, they're going to provide an overview on the permanent export of hardware, both for commercial end use and for temporary exports in the circumstances that you see there listed. And then following that, as I had stated before, we will open it up for a Q&A at the end of the session. So again, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have in that chat window. So the webinar host today, obviously brought to you by the American Suppressor Association. They are the trade association, they represent the suppressor industry. And obviously a very special thank you to the DDTC for their time and assistance with putting together this webinar. I know they're very busy, so wanted to extend them a very special thank you. And finally, Orchid Advisors, obviously providing compliance, technology, and legal assistance to the firearms industry. Next, Jordan. From the DDTC today, we have Mr. Alex Duville and Mr. Wilbert Pete Walker, both Division 6 Light Weapons Systems co-leads. DDTC, for those who don't know, is the government body who is responsible for licensing the export of suppressors, amongst many other products as well. Next, Jordan. From the ASA today, we have Mr. Knox Williams and Mr. Owen Miller on the phone. They will be introducing themselves and speaking momentarily. Knox and Owen, thank you both very much for joining us as well. And then finally, from Orchid Advisors, we have Mr. Jordan Young, who is the director and the lead of the ITAR EAR export practice at Orchid, and myself, the head of regulatory services at Orchid Advisors, and also the head of the FFL law firm, which is a separate company. So thank you all very much here for being with us today. And with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to the esteemed gentleman from the ASA for some remarks.
My name is Owen Miller. I'm the Director of Outreach for the American Suppressor Association. I've been with ASA for about 4 years now. Prior to that, I was on the manufacturing side of suppressors for 11 years. I was also the empowered official for a major manufacturer out west. And ASA, we've been part and parcel to lobbying for the last 6 years to change the export policy for suppressors to open up foreign markets where suppressors are already commercially available and expand opportunities for American companies. So we're just really pleased to be working with DDTC on these efforts and a part of this program.
Thank you very much, Owen. We appreciate you, and thank you for all that you do. And we just would like to again thank Alex and Pete from the DDTC for joining us today. We're going to speak a little bit about start off with kind of the historical, where we've been, where we are today, some of the changes, and we'll just, Pete, Alex, I'll throw it over to you, and please feel free.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank
yeah, as Jordan mentioned, we're just going to run through the historical, what the policy was, what it is, and then the last few slides are going to kind of work our way about our new requirements for actually how to do DSP-5s, permanent exports, and 73s, temporary exports of suppressors and hardware. So basically, our suppressor policy, as it was enacted in April of 2002, and that basically restricted firearms exports to government end users. We did not allow private or commercial end users. The other restrictions were that you couldn't have, a super amount of quantity on them, or it had to be, it was case by case, but it had to be justified. All shipments had to go directly to the end user. Couldn't go to a middleman. All applicants, everything was staffed out, and it can go for no greater than 1 year. And in addition to that, every shipment or export, they required a post-shipment check for that information to check the bona fides. So that was in play for 18 years. So with ECR, as it was coming down, ECR has been happening for the last 6 or 7 years. We decided to shift that policy a little bit, and in July 10th, 2020, we issued a web notice, which basically rescinded those requirements and allowed, in our new policy, allows for the commercial sale of suppressors. Now, the key to remember here is that we will handle suppressor exports in a manner consistent with other USML controlled technologies. Prior to ECR, for categories 1 and 3, we allowed commercial resale, basically what we call distributor commercial resale. So, and that was an exception to our policy. No other category do we allow commercial resale for articles to go to a distributor and then be sold to authorized persons within that country. So prior to our March 9th ECR rule, we allowed commercial resale for semi-automatic firearms and parts and components. When the rule went through and into effect, all of the nature of the firearms business was, it allowed that. So, but when the rule went into effect, all of the quote unquote commercially available firearms went to the Department of Commerce. So all semi-automatics, most parts and components for semi-automatics, went to the Department of Commerce. When that happened, the commercial resale, the distributor commercial resale, as the firearms industry knew it, kind of went with that. Now, all exports of USML defense articles, no matter what category, kind of follow the same pattern. And that pattern basically is that every permanent export license must have a single end user. So while we do allow the commercial resale or the commercial sale of suppressors, they cannot be commercially distributed by a distributor. The distributor, we can ship stuff to the distributor, but that distributor must provide us with individual names of the people that will buy them. And this policy became effective on July 10th, 2020.
Okay, hi, this is Pete. Based on the information that Alex has just put out, we're going to talk a little bit about the changes to the DSP-5 and the documentation that is received once that DSP-5 is submitted. Basically, the DSP-5 is submitted the same as any other DSP-5, but in this case, when it comes to the commercial end user, that commercial end user has to be identified in Block 14. In addition, the changes to the supporting documentation, the purchase order, the DSP-83 end user statement, and the import permit, the purchase order, again, should come from the entity that is purchasing the silencer. Now, it may also come from the foreign consignee, but that purchaser, the person that they're going to sell that suppressor to or give that suppressor to has to be identified on the purchase order. Now, also on the DSP-83, I think in the end user block on the DSP-83 has to be the end user of the suppressor, not the foreign consignee. It has to be the end user. Also, in the end user statement, the end user statement should come from the individual that is purchasing the suppressor, not the foreign consignee, but that individual. The same thing would apply for the import permit. The import permit should be addressed to the individual, not the foreign consignee. So where the change is coming from now is that end user has to be identified on all of these documents, where before the policy change, it was the distributor. So the distributor can no longer be identified as the end user, unless, but that's, I don't want to get ahead of the game. So if we could go to slide 11.
Yes, sir.
So here we will go through the administrative review. The process here is still the same. All license will be reviewed and adjudicated on a case-by-case basis. If we see where there are any discrepancies here, we would either, well, since the application can't be changed or altered at this point, the application will probably be returned without action with the rationale for the RWA and then resubmitted. All applications, when they are received, will go through, well, they go through some form of a pre-license check to verify the parties on the application, also to verify the quantity, whatever needs to be checked. The application will go through a license check to make sure everything is in order. And then in cases where an application needs to be staffed, it will be staffed to the appropriate agencies. And once those agencies have applied their positions to the case, then at that time the case will be released.
Now these post-shipment verifications checks is a change from the way that it used to be. It used to be that the old policy was that each license would require a post-shipment verification. Now we go back to the same policy that we have for all other categories. We may or may not do one for each, for each export. We can, but it's based on the requirements and the restrictions of our normal review that policy does. So if they feel like it needs to be, that a verification check needs to be conducted, that they will do it, but it's no longer policy to do one on each one.
Okay. Page 12, slide 12.
Just a quick question there, Pete, Alex. When we used to do these in the past for government, in most cases, there would be a proviso on the license requesting a serial number to be uploaded, now in DEX, I would imagine, or D-Trade. Is that still going to be the case on the export side, prior to export?
No, that is no longer a requirement to do that for each case. However, if it if a staffing point or if we request it in a case-by-case basis, we can still request that information in certain instances, but it's no longer a requirement for each license anymore.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, slide 12. Okay, so
Yes, sir.
once the application is approved, the suppressor that was approved is only for personal use. It cannot be resold. Of course, on each of a hardware application, there can be only one end user. You have to list the foreign consignee, of course. So basically, when you submit the DSP-5, the process is still the same for a hardware license. The only difference here is now that the suppressors will be limited. So if someone comes in with a application requesting maybe 5 or 6 suppressors, that may be questioned. 1 or 2 may not. So be very mindful of the number of suppressors that they're trying to request using the DSP-5, because we will limit what would be approved.
With that being said, I mean, it is a case-by-case scenario. So if it's the best protocol, I guess, is to always include a letter stating your justification. So if you have, say, 5 or 6 or 3 or 4, and you have a legitimate reason for them, you want to write that and tell us what that reason is. You don't want us to guess it, because it probably won't go well. But we'll take it on a case by case. We won't say that if it's automatically 3 or above, it won't be approved, but you just need to justify it, and we'll ask questions. But if you justify it and we feel that it's a valid reason, then we can approve, more than 1 or 2. Okay, now, since we realize that it's, each license for permanent export is going to have to be individualized for each individual person, there's going to potentially be more, the retailers in other countries are going to want to demonstrate and show off their suppressor hardware. So the way to do that, the best way to do that is a DSP-73, where we will export temporarily a limited number of suppressors to a distributor or for a trade show in demonstration and evaluation, and where you can show them off, and then where they can try them out, and then when they make the sale, then you can do another export license for the permanent export. The required documents for DSP-73 are: you need to have a letter of explanation. You want to tell us what you're doing. If it's a trade show, you want something from the trade show saying where you're going, who you're going to demonstrate it to, who's going to test and evaluate it. So the temporary end user would be the distributor or person you're sending it to, but then they would list in the foreign consignee block the trade shows and who they're demonstrating to. If it's police or the military, they'd want to list that in there. You would need a secure storage statement, basically, for how that entity is going to store them while they're not being demonstrated and whatnot. You want you need documents on the event details, proof of registration for trade shows, or invitation for demonstrations and testing and evaluation. And of course, you would need the import permit if one is required. This 73s mean that they will go out and then they will come back eventually. If it's a DSP-73 for a trade show, we may limit the expiration due to the date of the trade show or a little after to get it back. But or we'll limit the expiration to the import permit. If there is no import permit required and you want to demonstrate them to, say, the police or whomever, the maximum that we would allow a expiration date would be 4 years, and that's consistent with other licenses across the board. Like on other categories, if people are demonstrating a missile or a tank, we usually give them up to 4 years to do their demonstrations. But this means that they will just be coming back.
If I may add to that, if you have multiple trade shows, you may be able to save yourself some time and come in identify the trade shows and the dates of those trade shows, but it has to be within the 4-year period. So you can apply one DSP 73 for multiple trade shows.
And how do we do that? That would be additional foreign temporary consignees?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
And what if they're in different countries? Now, do we have to group them by countries there, or?
Well, one of the things that we ask is if you are going to different regions, it can go to different countries as long as they're within the same region. If you're going to different regions, then we recommend you do different 73s.
Mm-hmm. And what Pete means by that is, like, if you're going to show them at trade shows in Europe, that's great to put them on a license. But we recommend not putting a bunch of European countries and then all of a sudden you add an African or an Asian country, because they may get those and the reason why we do that is because they get delayed in staffing a lot of the times, and it's much easier to do it by region.
Very good to know.
So if there's no follow-up questions, we can move to slide 14. The licensing for temporary import to continue the trade show. So all licenses will be reviewed and adjudicated on a case-by-case basis as per our other categories, other licenses. Now, just give us our justification for what you're going to do with them, who you're going to show it to. You can do that. And they have to be returned to the U.S. once the expiration date is reached, or once the demonstration is done and you want to send it back. Now, a note about quantities for trade shows and for demonstration licenses. I mean, you need to justify the quantity too, because we're not going to probably allow, unless I can't see how we would allow, like, say 1,000. We wouldn't authorize 1,000 suppressors to go for demonstration and testing and evaluation. If it's a limited number of quantity, I mean, you're going to use these to show your customers what they do, what they look like, how they work, and all that, and then you'll have that on hand so they can review it and to make their determination whether they want to buy it. But no matter what the quantity is, you just want to justify it, and we'll take it as a case by case. Next one, we're on 15 now. Yeah, I guess we're going to slide 15 now.
Yes.
So these suppressors that are on a DSP 73 are not authorized for resale or transfer to any other parties besides the ones that you list as, on the DSP 73. Now, for a 73, we want you to list the entities that you're going to be demonstrating them to. So like police or say an organization like a company for testing and evaluation. But we do also understand with this firearms industry that you may also be demonstrating them to individual people within that country. So in that case, I recommend that in your letter of transmittal and in the purpose block, you state that these will also be used for demonstrating to authorized persons, individuals within those countries, just so we know. I mean, because you can't really obviously we're not going to ask you to put each of these people's names down as a foreign consignee. So if you're going to do the demonstration or marketing to individuals and not just entities like companies and governments, agencies, then you would need to put that in your purpose block and explain it in a letter.
For example, a trade show, maybe like EWA. I know a lot of folks go to EWA, and we've been doing DSP 73s to, that show, under. So that would be the same case, for.
Yeah, you just pretty much say private entities.
Yeah, I mean, trade shows are a little different because we obviously assume that you're going to be showing it off to individuals and those. But if you have a DSP 73 to say to go to Germany, I don't know, a company in Germany, 6 Hour or H&K or something like that, and they want to market it to the German military, the German police, German entities, and they also want to market it to people within Germany. So they will put all the German entities, the police departments, the military on as temporary foreign consignees, but they're also put in the purpose block. We will also demonstrate and market these to individuals within Germany, that are authorized by the laws of Germany or whatever to receive these. You just kind of show us that, tell us that you're going to be doing that kind of demonstrating as well.
Right. That would also go for maybe another distributor. I know there's many distributors in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
You send it to them for demonstration, sales purposes, you know, things like that.
Yeah, the key thing to know about 73s is you can't just demonstrate them and then sell those ones you demonstrated to
Sure.
the people that you'd have to come in for a different new export license to actually get the quantities of the suppressors that you want to the individuals that you need.
The other difference between the DSP-5 and the 73 is that you can have multiple temporary end users, where on your DSP-5 you can only have one end user.
Right. That's good to know as well. I'm sure a lot of folks thinking of in terms of sales, showing the product to get further exports to the end user might utilize this as a tool for that purpose.
Great.
Right.
So on your last set of slides, licensing to dealer samples, the process, rather than going through the slides, the process is still the same, pretty much as a DSP-5 for commercial end use. The only difference here is when the applicant submits that DSP-5 application, in their transmittal letter, they have to state in their transmittal letter that these suppressors will not be resold. The quantity is going to still be pretty much the same, so there won't be a bulk quantity. We normally will approve an application for a minimal amount, but basically all of the parties, how they're listed on the purchase order, the DSP-83, the end user statement, and the import permit is all still the same. Once the application is received, it still will go through the same adjudication process. Of course, again, the end user, which is the foreign dealer, is identified on the end user statement, of course, and then the statement will be made that, you know, he's going to keep the suppressors in his inventory. They're not going to be resold. And so it's pretty much the same as a basic DSP-5 application again, but the statement has to be made that they're for sample, for demo use only. They're not going to be resold or re-exported. So that's pretty much it, unless there are questions.
Now to piggyback on that, for demonstrating and marketing of USML articles, DDTC does prefer that if you're going to do that, it goes out on a DSP-73, because generally speaking, we don't usually allow a permanent export for marketing of SME items, but we will entertain them on a case-by-case basis. So if there's good justification for doing that, then we will allow a limited number, as Pete was saying, to go out on a permanent export for marketing purposes. Just got to give us that justification and explain it, because those cases that we do review, if it is like that, we are going to ask more questions, because with SME articles particularly, we usually like those coming back if it's not going to be permanently exported. That's why also what's the word before?
Control statement.
Yeah, where you're going to keep
security letter, security statement.
Yeah, the security statement of where they're going to be stored while they're in country but not being sold. So that's going to be important. So we do allow limited quantities. Just justify it and explain to us why you need that and why it shouldn't be on or it can't be on a DSP-73 temporary export.
And they must make it clear that if they're getting these for samples, that they're not going to be resold. Once they demo it, it's coming back to the company, and that suppressor will be maintained at that company.
Right. So the 73, as you said, is the preferred method for getting. I would imagine this would also be a good tool for you know, for U.S. manufacturers and others to get product sales samples in a way that, you know, people can have them at a distributor for testing, and then, you know, or seeing how they work, or, you know, show and tell basically for, you know, the coming back in with getting the DSP-5 and make the sale and the permanent export. Now, so just to circle back a little bit on kind of maybe a process thought. So each individual end user needs to be identified on a single license. So you would have, you know, one license for one end user.
Correct.
Yes.
But having that foreign consignee, the distributor or dealer in that country, listed on, if they're all going to one consignee and he's going to be making the transfers, you could do multiple licenses with the same consignee. Everything could be shipped in theory to that one consignee for the individual export licenses that he would then, you know, transfer to those end users once received. So is that something that would be doable, you know, in that case?
Well, you couldn't put say 100 suppressors on a license to company distributor X
Right.
to distribute to individual people, but you can have individual licenses.
You can have 100 licenses
with the same distributor on it and different end users, and then you can, once you have all those licenses, you can do one shipment to that foreign consignee.
Right. You can have 100 licenses.
Right.
If you want.
And then you can ship 100. Then you can ship 100, but you can't just ship.
Yeah.
You can't just have, because each hardware license has to have it in the identified ultimate end user on it. So you can't ship 10 licenses. 10 suppressors to a foreign consignee and only ship one of those to an end user, and then down the road you're going to get more. No, it has to be individualized.
And each of those licenses has to have its own purchase order, end user statement, and DSP 83.
So no change to the document pack. Every DSP-5 is standalone with all the required documentation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move. And I did have a question. One question came up. Now, a dealer is actually the end user. So the owner of a dealership in a foreign country actually wants to purchase for his own personal use. And the dealer is, the consignee is going to be the dealership, and the end user is actually the owner of the dealership. In that case, we would just be licensing the foreign end user. He just happens to be the owner of the firearms dealership or distributorship in wherever it may be, Germany or Switzerland. So in that case,
well, if the dealer is purchasing it for himself, he should identify himself as the foreign consignee and the foreign end user.
Right.
His company as the foreign consignee and himself as the foreign end user.
Right. Okay. So, you know, on the DSP-83, that would be, if I'm not mistaken, block 7 is the consignee block. Anyway, it would be the foreign consignee, and then would sign, and the end user and provide the end user statement as for himself. The import license in this case would be through the through his dealership. That's who he received the import license through his company.
Right, as long as he's identified. He should also be identified on the import permit.
Right,
As
exactly, yeah, by name.
By name.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. Are there any other suggestions, tips, or recommendations that you might provide on any of these licenses is there anything that you have seen? I know it's kind of in the early stages. Anything that you've seen from your perspective that you think industry should know to make sure to keep an eye on, or anything that to that end that you've seen as far as things licenses that you've seen come through that may need to be corrected, or some of the things that you've seen error-wise that you may have had to return RWA in the early stages of this new policy?
Well, I would just say be clear on the wording on your end user certificate or your end user statement. Try not to use commercial resale, because that's a no-no. We have seen where companies are still including commercial resale, and that in itself is a sticking point. And we will require another end user statement, and then if we can't get it within a reasonable amount of time, then that application is going to be returned. So as far as these suppressors are concerned, try not to use commercial resale.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback off of that, we do realize that there has been some confusion with the web notice that came out, because it says that we will allow for commercial sale of these articles, but it's not the commercial resale that was pre-ECR, it was pre-March 9th, because that was only allowed for those two categories, 1 and 3, and all of those articles that we allowed it for transferred to commerce. Now, we realize now, I guess maybe belatedly, that a lot of the firearms industry never used the other categories, so that's why there's some confusion as to what the ultimate end user has to be identified kind of part. You can do it, it's just you need to identify the ultimate for an end user. You can't do distributor resale anymore. So that's why it's important to do what we're doing right now, is to get the word out and have these webinars where we can kind of explain it a little more and hopefully clarify the issue.
Right. So for those folks that may have exported suppressors or machine guns in the past, they may be aware of, how those worked, or some other, like you said, some other categories. So it's definitely a paradigm shift, because a lot of what we've done in the past is that wholesale distribution type method to the one point in country for further resale.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, there's probably got to be some questions.
Yes. We do have one question came up, so I'll read it to you. It is unclear to me if distributors will be allowed to purchase sound suppressors for display under a DSP-5. I understand that they could not resell the items. So I think going back to that display or dealer sample question, and I can reread the question if you like.
No. A dealer or a distributor can come in under a DSP-5 and request a suppressor that he wants to use to demo or to use on a display. He also has to state in his, the applicant has to state, and it also should be stated in his end user statement that that suppressor will not be resold or re-exported. It is for his purpose only, to display. That's it.
Right. For company use and not for resale. Display
That is correct.
only.
Yes.
On a 5.
Yes.
You can also do that on a 73, and that you just but after 4 years, you would just have to.
You just have to keep renewing the 73 if he wants to retain it.
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up there. So for those, you can come in prior to, what is it, about 90 days prior to an expiration, which, I'm sorry?
60 days.
60 days. So 60 days prior to an expiration of a 73, you would, that's permissible to come in and extend that license, or do you issue a new 73 that basically takes the place of the old one?
But you still have to keep in mind that under that 73, that suppressor has to come back.
Right, absolutely.
At some point.
Yes. Okay. Okay, great. So in this case, this year with all the COVID going on, I know we ran into that, and on top of the COVID, with like for Eway, an example, we had orders, 73s, we had shipments going out there. We didn't know if the show was, initially it got postponed. So a lot of our folks had to get extensions on the DSP 73. And then the ECR thing happened, so we had to guys had to make some special concessions on top of everything, I think to open back those licenses, to extend them out. So we didn't know. Yeah, it's been a year, I tell you, a lot going on.
Yeah.
We did get one more question here. Has anything changed regarding shipping under a treaty? For example, Australia, U.S. Defense Treaty.
That's a policy question.
Yeah. You mean in terms of suppressors, or just in terms of firearms in general?
If the person that just sent that question could clarify that, I would think suppressors, but you may want to check that.
Yeah, Pete and I aren't really aware
Suppressors,
of
yes.
changes, but we have to bring that up with our policy folks who do all the requirements for the treaties to find out exactly, because we don't really see licenses for treaties. There's other authorizations that they use, so we would have to run that by the policy folks. And we'd have
Right.
to, if you want to send that to us in an email, we can send it to the powers that be, and we can probably get an answer for you.
Oh, very, very nice. And we'll have your contact information up shortly. Oh, you have all the emails, addresses up there for any questions. Happy to help. Phil and myself from Orchid, we definitely want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today. We're happy to help with anything export related, import related, as well as any ATF regulatory services. Orchid provides a grand array of services, and it's all specially designed for the firearms, ammunition, shooting, hunting, sporting goods industry. So with that, Alex, Pete, I'd like to thank you very much again for all the time and effort and all that you do for us in the industry here, and as well as the Mr. Owen Miller from the ASA. Great participation from everyone. It was a real great audience today. We certainly hope that you found a value in it, and with this new policy, we're still kind of at the early stages. I imagine there's some feeling out that will be done on both sides. And, you know, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
No problem.